Caitlin Clark is clearly a catalyst for a business that was, and let's be honest, Caitlin to some degree financially saved the WNBA. It was hemorrhaging money for.
They sold you a feel-good story, a lighthearted, harmless narrative about a superstar athlete spending her off-season swinging golf clubs and taking a break from the chaos of the league. On the surface, it sounded perfect, wholesome even. But here's the truth no one was supposed to focus on. That story wasn't the real story. It was the smokescreen. For weeks, every major outlet, highlight page, and fan account latched on to a single offhand comment. They spun it into a headline. They pushed it like it was the biggest off-season plot twist of the year. Golf. Just golf. A quirky hobby. A fun distraction. The kind of thing that lets fans smile, nod, and move on. But while they were busy laughing about 9-irons and tee shots, something very real was happening behind the curtain. A high-stakes move, a quiet power shift with millions of dollars and the future of an entire league on the line. And here's where it gets unsettling. This wasn't just media hype, this was orchestrated. Because in sports, when a story this soft gets this much oxygen, it's almost never by accident. It's because someone or something needs your attention somewhere else. And the more people talked about golf, the fewer people noticed the bombshell decision quietly unfolding in the background. This decision wasn't casual. It wasn't a shrug. It was a shot fired, clean, calculated, and louder than anyone realized. While fans were distracted by a country club fairy tale, the most marketable player in the league made a move that sent shockwaves straight through the front offices, sponsorship boards, and media rooms of women's basketball. Think about that for a second. One headline, harmless on the surface, was enough to bury a seismic story that will define how the league operates for years to come. It's one of those rare moments where the real game isn't happening on the court. It's happening in boardrooms, back channels, and private calls. And the people who understand that, they saw the shift coming. Because the golf story, that was never about golf. It was cover. It was the clean white sheet thrown over a very real power play. And when the smoke clears, what's underneath is something the league never wanted front and center. A decision that threatens to shake the foundation of their entire off-season strategy. This is where the real story begins. Not on the fairway, not on some random broadcast quote, but right here, in the shadows behind the headline everyone swallowed without asking why. For months, the story was clean, simple, easy to swallow. Fans, media, and even the players themselves were led to believe this was a team with a vision, a franchise operating with a calculated plan. There was supposed to be a roadmap, one that promised dominance, unity, and legacy. Every press conference, every neatly worded statement, every behind-the-scenes leak carefully painted the same picture. Nothing was wrong. Everything was under control. The front office spoke in confident tones about building for the future. Analysts on national television repeated the talking points like gospel. Reporters amplified the same narrative in article after article. This was all part of a master plan. It wasn't chaos, they told us. It was chess. Fans bought it. They had no reason not to. The numbers seemed to match the story. A few shaky losses were framed as growing pains. Awkward team dynamics were dismissed as part of the process. Even the stars who were clearly unhappy were described as competitive leaders pushing for excellence. And slowly, almost without noticing, the public internalized that version of reality. Every odd roster decision, every strange press quote, every subtle red flag was explained away as part of the vision. But what no one knew, what very few dared to even question, was that the narrative wasn't just fragile, it was fabricated. A smokescreen built with precision. A story told so many times, it began to sound like truth. This was never about a brilliant long-term strategy. It was about control. It was about power. And the moment that truth began to crack through the carefully painted surface, everything, the team, the trust, and the illusion, started to unravel. It didn't happen in a packed press conference. There were no flashy headlines at first, no leaks, not even a hint. The offer appeared out of nowhere.
A single conversation behind closed doors that would send shockwaves through the entire league. The kind of move no one prepares for because no one believes it could actually happen. Up to that point, everything had followed a predictable rhythm. Negotiations were slow, methodical, safe. The front office had everyone convinced that they were in control, that no deal would happen unless it was on their terms. They set the narrative. They dictated the pace. And then came the curveball. A proposal so unexpected, so calculated that it didn't just change the conversation, it ripped the old one apart. It didn't come from the usual power players. It came from the outside, from a place no one in that war room had circled on their whiteboards. At first, they tried to keep it quiet, buried in silence. But silence doesn't hold forever, especially not when money, power, and loyalty are on the line. Word trickled out, not as a headline, but as a pulse, a sudden shift in energy. People close to the team could feel something had changed.
It wasn't just a contract, it was a statement. A challenge to the entire power structure that had kept things so carefully balanced. The offer was bold, it was disruptive, and most importantly, it forced everyone, from the locker room to the executive suite, to pick a side. From that moment on, nothing could go back to the way it was. The offer itself was massive, but it wasn't the offer that made the ground shake. It was the rejection. In a league where loyalty is usually paper-thin and business is disguised as family, no one expected a move like this. Players change teams every season. Executives spin narratives like clockwork. But rejecting an offer of this scale wasn't just saying no to a contract. It was saying no to the entire system. Front offices are built on predictability. When someone is offered power, money, or leverage, there's an unspoken understanding that they'll take it. That's how the machine keeps turning. But when a star, someone with real influence, stands up and walks away from the table, it creates a ripple effect. And this time, that ripple didn't stop at one locker room. It swept across the league. Behind the scenes, phones started buzzing. Executives called each other not out of strategy, but out of panic. Did you hear what just happened? Why would they say no? What are they planning? Analysts scrambled for explanations. They tried to package the story neatly as a negotiating tactic, a personal decision, a misunderstanding. But nothing about it fit the standard script. This wasn't a bargaining chip. This was a line drawn in the sand. More importantly, the rejection exposed cracks in the image the league had carefully built. It revealed that not everyone was buying into the same narrative anymore. For years, players had followed the unspoken rules: play the game, stay quiet, cash the check. But now, someone had flipped the script. And once one person does it, others start to wonder if they can too. That's why this single no wasn't just a rejection, it was a threat, a spark in a dry forest, a moment that made the powerful realize their control might not be as absolute as they thought. The league thrives on certainty, but after this moment, certainty was gone. And panic, quiet, invisible, but very real, started to set in. In the middle of all the headlines, the trade rumors, and the power plays, there was something far quieter happening, something that wasn't showing up on social media or in post-game interviews. The pressure, the fatigue, the cost. While fans debated the offer and analysts tore apart every angle of the rejection, the people at the center of the storm were carrying a weight no one else could see. It wasn't just about the money or the politics anymore. It was about what it was doing to them. Every decision behind the scenes had consequences. Friendships strained, trust fractured, locker rooms turned colder. What used to be casual conversations became measured, careful exchanges, where every word could be twisted, leaked, or weaponized. Players weren't just playing the game on the court anymore. They were playing it off of it too. For some, it meant sleepless nights. For others, quiet resentment. A few buried their emotions under a mask of professionalism. But even that had its limits. When everything around you starts feeling unstable, when every conversation feels like it has a hidden meaning, It eats at your focus. And the front office? They pretended everything was fine. Smiles in front of cameras, tight-lipped statements behind them. But inside, they felt it too. The narrative they'd carefully built was slipping. And when control slips, fear grows. This was the part nobody wanted to acknowledge publicly. The human cost of the chaos. The toll it was taking not just on reputations, but on people. On their ability to trust, to breathe, to perform. Because the truth is, every empire that falls doesn't crumble in a single moment. It cracks, slowly, quietly, beneath the surface, long before anyone dares to say it out loud. And here, those cracks were widening. From the outside, it looked reckless. Turning down that kind of offer, one that could reshape the entire landscape, didn't make sense to anyone watching. Commentators called it ego. Fans called it a mistake. Rival teams called it a blessing.
But behind the curtain, it wasn't impulsive. It was calculated. The rejection wasn't just a response. It was a statement. A quiet declaration that they weren't going to be controlled, cornered, or used as someone else's chess piece. It was about power. Not the kind you brag about in interviews, but the kind that happens in boardrooms, whispered between executives and tested when the pressure is at its highest. They knew exactly what the offer meant. It wasn't just a trade or a deal, it was leverage. Accepting it would have meant surrendering long-term control for short-term safety. And in their world, safety is a luxury you can't always afford. What most people missed is that sometimes saying no is more dangerous than saying yes. It forces everyone around you to reveal who they really are. Allies show their doubts, enemies show their teeth, and people who were once neutral suddenly have to pick a side. The decision rippled like shockwaves. Rival franchises started questioning their own moves. Agents began circling like sharks, sensing an opening. And deep down, even the people who had supported the offer began to wonder if they'd underestimated the game being played. This was never about just one player, one team, or one deal. It was about control of the narrative itself. If they said yes, the story would belong to someone else. But with a no, the story stayed theirs. They forced everyone else to react, to adjust, to scramble. And here's the part nobody fully grasped at first. This wasn't a short-term play. This was positioning. A slow, deliberate move to build leverage piece by piece. It was a reminder that power in the league isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a quiet refusal that flips the entire board upside down. But with power moves come consequences. And this one, it was about to set off a chain reaction no one could stop. When the no finally hit the league, it didn't just echo. It detonated. What had started as whispers behind closed doors suddenly became full-blown conversations that no one could avoid. Teams started moving differently. Executives who once felt like they were on the same page now looked at each other like rivals in the same war room. The entire power balance shifted overnight. Front offices scrambled to figure out what came next. Calls were made at odd hours. Contingency plans that had been sitting in folders for months were suddenly being dusted off and reworked. The rejection didn't just shut a door, it forced every other door to swing open. And just like that, the league wasn't unified anymore. Quiet alliances started forming, like invisible lines drawn on a battlefield. Some teams sided with the decision, believing it was a bold move that would change the rules. Others were furious, seeing it as a reckless gamble that disrupted everything they'd been building toward. What made it even dangerous was how personal it became. This wasn't just business anymore. This was about loyalty, pride, and legacy.
The ones who felt betrayed weren't just going to walk away quietly. They started pushing back, leaking information, spinning narratives, painting villains and heroes depending on which side they stood on. And the media? They fed off it like sharks in the water. Stories twisted, rumors grew bigger. Suddenly every action, every quote, every subtle gesture was dissected like it held the secret to the league's future. Players couldn't say a word without it being turned into a headline. Coaches couldn't make a move without it being framed as part of the war. Inside locker rooms, the tension was real. Conversations that once felt casual now carried weight. Trust became a luxury. Everyone wanted to know who was really on their side and who was waiting to strike when the timing was right. This wasn't just fallout. This was the beginning of a new era, one defined not by games played on the court, but battles waged in the shadows. And as the lines hardened, it became clear there was no going back to how things used to be. The storm had arrived, and everyone would have to pick a side. At first, it looked like just another power struggle, a clash of egos, money, and timing. But anyone paying attention could see it wasn't about a single deal anymore. It was about who gets to shape the future. The rejection was the spark, but what came after was something far bigger. Behind closed doors, the conversation shifted from what happens now to what happens next.
Some teams saw an opening to seize control of the narrative, to set a new standard that could tilt the league's balance of power for years to come. Others, terrified of losing the grip they'd built, began quietly building alliances of their own. Meetings were no longer just about players or contracts. They were about influence, over media, over fans, over the very direction the league would take. It wasn't just executives moving pieces anymore. Agents, sponsors, and media figures joined the game too. Everyone had something to gain, and even more to lose. Suddenly, a decision made in one corner of the league could ripple across every franchise, every locker room, every paycheck. This is where the real war began, not on the court, but in whispers, leaks, and carefully planned moves. Every headline was part of someone's playbook. Every anonymous source had an agenda. And the public? They were only seeing fragments of the battlefield. The players caught in the middle were forced to pick sides whether they wanted to or not. Some aligned with powerhouses that promised stability. Others leaned toward those who promised change. But neutrality was no longer an option. The game had evolved into something bigger, colder, more calculated. The old rules, the ones that had governed how deals were made, how power flowed, how narratives were written, were starting to crack. And when rules crack, people rush to write new ones. This wasn't just about this season or the next. It was about rewriting what the future would look like. And here's the chilling part. In this war, winning isn't always about who has the best roster or the biggest contract. It's about who can control perception, who can turn the story into their weapon, who can make the world believe their version of the truth. The real war wasn't loud. It was quiet, precise, ruthless. And the ones who underestimated it were already losing. When the dust finally settles, it's clear that what looked like a simple offseason decision was anything but. On the surface, it seemed like just another headline, a player saying no, a league reacting, fans debating. But beneath it all, something far more profound was happening. This was a power play, quiet, calculated, and invisible to most. A move that didn't just protect a single career or even a single season. It reshaped the very rules of the league. It sent a message that players aren't pawns, that health, legacy, and strategic vision can and should outweigh short-term gains. Think about the ripple effects.
The new offseason league, designed to capitalize on attention and revenue, suddenly lost its star attraction. Sponsorships, media coverage, even fan engagement, all of it was thrown into question. And the message to other players? You have a choice. You can protect yourself. You can prioritize your own strategy. You don't have to follow the script. This wasn't arrogance. It wasn't defiance for the sake of drama. It was a long-term strategy executed with surgical precision. Every decision, every refusal, every calculated no was a chess move designed to control not just the present, but the future. And the broader lesson? The real game in professional sports isn't always played on the court. Sometimes it's played in boardrooms, in whispers, in calculated silences. The headlines may be loud, but the true power moves are subtle, unseen, and far-reaching. This is the story no one else wanted you to see. The one that redefines what it means to have influence, to make choices, and to challenge the status quo. A story of quiet dominance, of strategic brilliance, and of a league forced to confront the fact that control is never absolute. So, what's your verdict? Was this a masterclass in power and legacy, or a disruption that could have unforeseen consequences for the future? The conversation isn't over, and one thing is certain. In this league, the game isn't just on the court. It's everywhere else, too. If you want to stay in the loop, see the moves no one else talks about, and understand the stories behind the headlines, make sure you're subscribed and ready for the next chapter. Because the fallout from this decision is only just beginning, and it's going to change everything.